Montana today. I want to make sure that you understand a couple of things. One is that questions are more than welcome. I've got people that are helping me go through them, so that we'll address them either as they come in or at the end of the session. But there will be a lot of information, and if I skip over something or something you'd like some more detail on, please feel free to type into the box, the chat box, as Stephanie pointed out, and I intend to have either interrupt the presentation or answer those questions at the end. So feel free to do that. And I also want to just reiterate that even though this webinar is on the Montana model, many of you listening serve on fatality review teams or have done that. And the idea here is that there are some ideas, some things that we do in Montana that may be of interest to you. I see this as kind of a buffet or a menu of options, traveling to the community in which the killing took place, talking to family members, those kinds of things that might be of interest. But we in Montana have as much to learn from you as you have from us. Again, this is a way of doing things that the National Domestic Violence Fatality Review Initiative has identified as best practices, but in no way is this meant to be a one-size-fits-all. There are some unique things to Montana's team, including, for instance, that it's a statewide team rather than being a county team or a judicial district team that may well not work for you. So please consider this as a kind of a box checking exercise of this might work and this might not, rather than seeing this as something that we think would work everywhere, because I'm well aware of the fact that elements of how we do things in Montana may not work in your community. I would mention that normally a companion to the PowerPoint that we're going to go through today, there's a film, a 20-minute documentary on Montana's team that the United States Department of Justice put together several years ago. So if what you hear today interests you to the point that you want to know some more information, if you go to the National Domestic Violence Fatality Review Initiative website, which is NDVFRI.org, down at the bottom of that homepage, you'll see a link to our film. So many of the things I talk about today are also duplicated in the film, but you will see a couple of actual reviews taking place. There's a review in which the mother of the victim and the mother of the perpetrator are both interviewed. So again, if it would add some detail and kind of flesh out what I'm talking about today if you would like a chance to watch that film. Also, Montana, our team is required by statute to put out a review, a summary of our reviews every 2 years. And we have that as a PDF on the Montana Department of Justice website, which is there on the first slide, dojmt.gov/victims. So if you're looking for many of the graphics, the way the team works are replicated in that report. So another resource after we're done today would be that 2013 report, which is on the DOJ website. So to begin in the beginning, the team was created in Montana in 2003. It was created by an act of the legislature. Many of the teams, of you listening, serve on teams that also have statutory backing. It makes the work of the fatality review team much easier. It provides things like, I need to remember to move the slide ahead, there we go. So here in Montana, it recognized that we just have one statewide team. For those of you who haven't been to Montana or maybe even would have difficulty finding it on a map, we're the 4th largest state in the country land-wise and only have about 1 million people. So it's a very sparsely populated. We have 7 what we call urban communities, and there will be a map later in the presentation that you can see that. But given the size of our state and the low population, it would not make sense to have county teams or judicial district teams. So we just have one statewide team, and you'll see in the slide shortly the makeup of the team, but we view it as essential that the team, which is capped at 18, so we don't have a whole lot of slots, that there be tremendous diversity across that team by occupation, by gender and geography, because similar to the community in which you live in, domestic violence or intimate partner homicide looks different in an urban community than it does in a very rural community. And in fact, in Montana, as you'll hear about, we do fatality review in Indian country on Native American reservations, which are even more rural. So we feel it's absolutely essential that the members of the team represent the state and the diversity we have here. The statute exempts us from the open meeting law. It makes the information that the team collects non-discoverable, so the team will spend weeks pulling together all kinds of information, criminal justice reports, autopsy photos, interview notes, pre-sentence investigations, all of those things. And it would be a treasure trove to an attorney perhaps to have all of that presented, but the information is non-discoverable, and it also provides immunity to the person who gives us the information. So for those of you who work in an environment that you're used to having requests of information, this statute is sort of the be-all, end-all of requests of information, which says that if you have information that would be relevant to this review and you're asked by a team member to do it, you need to provide that information, and in turn you have immunity against prosecution for having done so. As I mentioned, we operate out of the Attorney General's office. Attorney General Fox appoints the members. He oversees the work of the team, and as I already mentioned, the Department of Justice website is the repository for our information, and that information for the most part is contained in a report that is required by statute. It might surprise you to know that our legislature in Montana only meets every 2 years, and then only for 90 days. So it's a very busy time, and it's essential that we be prepared to get any work done if we have a recommendation that involves a statute change. So one of the unique elements of Montana's statute is that it requires a legislator, as you can see there. So, of course, legislators come and go, and in fact in Montana we have term limits, so that position changes more than some others. But the idea is that it's important for someone that works as a legislator to understand what we're doing, and that person also to serve, to carry any bills or do any work in the legislature during a session. You'll also note that the statute requires a Native American to be part of our team, and that's because Native Americans are the single largest minority, or what the federal government refers to as underserved population. So we believe it's important to have a member of that minority on the team. So we do, by statute, have a Native American that sits on the team as well. And then these other bullets, the U.S. Attorney, FICMR in Montana stands for the Fetal Infant Child Mortality Review. Your state, every state has a child death review team. We think it's important. OPI underneath that is the Office of Public Instruction. These are all constituencies that, depending on what the review is, have come to our aid. So they have served as ad hoc members to the team when we've investigated an intimate partner homicide that perhaps had school-age children, or something we call a familicide. Maybe not only was the spouse killed, but the children as well. So while those 18 members of the team are the permanent members, we also, our statute and our protocols allow for bringing members in as needed when a particular review calls for that level of expertise. We also have a child psychologist that we can rely on, and also someone who is very well acquainted with trauma, particularly childhood trauma. And these people don't attend every review, but they attend reviews that that we can benefit from their institutional knowledge. The statute makes clear, and I have a slide of the statute to show you, that confidentiality is absolutely essential to the functioning of the team, and also includes a penalty that if a person that breaks that confidentiality not only loses their spot on the team, but can be fined civilly. Advocate privilege is not necessarily spoken to in the statute, but that is a key concern of every fatality review team. Now in Montana, we have the luxury of the right to privacy ending at death. So a domestic violence advocate is able to come and participate with the team just like any other member without needing to be afraid of compromising their confidentiality. But I'm well aware that in many states that privacy continues past the death of the victim, and then the team must arrive at some means of being able to have the domestic violence advocate participate on the team, because it doesn't work to have everyone else, law enforcement, judges, chaplains, to be presenting information, and suddenly the system breaks down when the advocate isn't able to present any information. So there are a variety of ways to get around that, and we don't have time today to go into any detail, but it is certainly true that some areas have something, a waiver, when a victim comes into a domestic violence shelter. She signs a waiver that says, I agree to allow my information to be shared in the event of my death. That possibility is not without controversy. So without meaning to go into any kind of exhaustive discussion of how advocate privilege is dealt with, it's essential, it's elementary to a team's functioning that advocate privilege be addressed. Also, that someone on the team be identified as the contact for the media, for the community. Now in Montana, that's the coordinator, and that's my role. It doesn't necessarily need to be the coordinator, but everyone on the team needs to know who that media person is, so that when requests come in, those requests funnel to this person, who then speaks to reporters or perhaps makes presentations in the community, that kind of thing, because it's essential in order to protect confidentiality that just one person is handling those chores rather than everyone on the team fulfilling those requests. As I mentioned, the biennial report is a requirement of the statute. The biennial report, in addition to being available to the public, goes to the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, the Attorney and the Governor, Attorney General and the Governor. So all of those people at the highest levels of government are aware of what the team is working on. And the goal of the report is to summarize our work. So as you'll see in a moment, our team just does 2 reviews a year. There are some teams that do 2 reviews a month or even more than that. But we have decided to take what we refer to as an inch wide and a mile deep approach to doing fatality review. So in a biennial report, which means every 2 years, that report will summarize those 4 reviews, 2 per year, and will also identify trends and recommendations, things that we've uncovered during that 4-year stretch. So for instance, over the years, we in Montana have identified that the number of female perpetrated intimate partner homicides has increased dramatically in the last few years over the first few years that we did our work. We also have seen a trend that in Montana, if a man kills a woman, almost always he uses a firearm to do that, whereas if a woman kills a man, almost invariably she uses a knife instead of a firearm. We also see that the rate of intimate partner homicide in our reservation communities in Indian country is almost half again as high as it should be for the population. So for instance, Native Americans make up 7% of the population in Montana, but 12% of the victims of intimate partner homicide. But then interestingly, when we drill down on those Native American rates, we see that all of the victims and all of the perpetrators are Native Americans. So you may well have seen that in other parts of the country, the perpetrators of domestic violence or intimate partner homicide in Indian country are non-natives who come onto the reservation and create mayhem and then flee the reservation without prosecution. But in Montana, we have seen only Native perpetrators and only Native victims. So part of the work of any fatality review team is to present the facts, even if we can't understand them. It's not entirely clear to us why knives are used by women and guns by men, but the job of the team is to present the information even if it is unclear why it is. We also, while we see some familicide, some family killings off the reservation, in the 14 years we've been doing this work, we have not seen any Native American familicides at all. So we've seen Indian men killing Indian women and vice versa, but none that have killed children. We also see that 80% of the killings in Indian country do not involve a firearm. Only 20% do, which is the exact opposite of killings off the reservation. So non-reservation communities, 80% of those killings are firearms. On the reservation, just the opposite. Again, we have some hypotheses of why that is, but it's our job as the one team in Montana to present that information and then to work with others in the state and out of the state to try to understand what those are. But one of the goals of that report is to present the information even if we're not entirely sure why that's there. The Fatality Review team in Montana, but also in your community, becomes the expert on intimate partner homicide. So everything from school children wanting information on the topic, to media, to legislators, to politicians, to community members, it's essential that the team has some means of communicating their information to their constituents, to the larger community, and that report, which for us is biennial, for you might be once a year or every 6 months, that there be some means of providing that information to those that you're serving, because it's a very small group of people that are in the room for the review, but it's essential that the information that team learns be communicated to those outside of the room while respecting confidentiality. As you can see there, ways to do that are through the website, and then of course you'll be required to have a website that could host your report, and then some of those people that benefit from it. I want to reinforce that our team back in 2003, or actually it was earlier than that, was trained by NDVFRI. NDVFRI has a TA, technical assistance contract with the U.S. Department of Justice, the Violence Against Women Office. So if your area doesn't have a team and you're interested in either more information about what you heard about today or starting a team, NDVFRI is an excellent resource for that. It can be done at limited cost to your community, and it would be worth your while either to contact Stephanie or Dr. Neil Websdale through that link. And as I mentioned, there also is a link to the DOJ film at ndvfri.org. But we took the kind of standard NDVFRI training and put our Montana stamp on it, and you will have the option to do the same thing should you follow up with them. Teams are funded by a variety of means. Some have no funding whatsoever. Our team is funded by STOP dollars. That's Violence Against Women Act funding that every state in the country gets based on a formula based on population. And if your team is struggling with funding, that is a possible source, and there's a contact person. Every state has a contact person who administers those STOP dollars, and that would be easy enough for you to find if you're not aware of that. And also federal grants, federal Violence Against Women Act grants, have also been used to fund Fatality Review teams. So there are funding mechanisms besides state or local funding. Our team gets by on a shoestring, I think, like most teams do. As you can see there, the funding, there is no pay for those who participate, but on the other hand, it doesn't cost them money. Because our team travels to the community in which the killing took place, which is, as you'll see, one of the atypical or unusual parts of the way we do business. Those funds cover mileage, lodging, and per diem, because our reviews actually take place over a couple of days, so it's essential that we cover those basic expenses. We also hire a facilitator, which not all teams do, but in the beginning I tried to be both the coordinator and the facilitator, and I found out I didn't do a very good job at either one of those. So if the facilitator makes sure that we start on time, we end on time, that we take breaks. We're relying on people to give us a lot of time, and it's important that we be able to honor that time by not going over, having adequate food to eat, those kinds of things. And so our facilitator takes care of that, and then any legislator on the team gets remunerated for their time. That's part of their contract with the state, so we cover legislative pay as well. We get about $10,000 a year through that VAWA grant, and then we augment that with about $5,000 a year through state pay. So our team functions on about $15,000 a year, not including any personnel costs. Whoops. This is just a snapshot of our our confidentiality agreement. I don't want to read it to you. Many of these elements could be found on the confidentiality form that your team signs. It's absolutely essential that there be a confidentiality agreement. This is in Montana, every team member signs this, and then anyone who joins the team at the local level, and I'll talk about that in a minute, also signs it. So there's a written record that everyone, even though some people have been on the team for 10 years and have signed this many, many times, everyone signs it as a reminder of just how important it is that confidentiality be followed at all times. I want to point out item number 4, which says any public presentation of case illustrations by our team coordinator or other authorized team member will have all identifying characteristics removed. So even if you were to read that biennial report, there are no details in there of what communities we were. So it's possible to talk about fatality review in Montana without compromising the communities that we went to, and we have found a way to do that, and this webinar is in fact a way to do that. It is important that everyone follow this, but that does not mean the team is muzzled or can't somehow communicate its work. It just needs to be done judiciously and carefully. The only other particular item I'll call to your attention is item number 9, which reinforces that breaking this agreement can result in removal for the team, which I can guarantee you would happen, but also a civil penalty. Not many confidentiality forums have that, and that was actually out of the statute. That was one more way that the legislature could reinforce their commitment to confidentiality in this process. Here's a little bit more of the structure. I've referenced some of these things, but now I want to break down the review process. What do we do over 2 days, and what makes Montana's model unique? So as I mentioned, we just do 2 a year. We do them in May and we do them in October, and that's primarily for weather reasons. If you've ever had the misfortune of be traveling 500 miles across Montana in February, you'll know why we don't do reviews in the dead of winter. It's just sort of tradition that we did them in those months. They also are always on a Thursday and a Friday. We didn't decide that as a team, but it seemed to work better with people traveling great distances to do it at the end of the week. So we came to, and the number of reviews we do is also limited by funding. They're very expensive. As mentioned before, we pay mileage. We've had at least one review that one participant traveled more than 500 miles each way to be able to participate, and when you're paying 55 cents a mile at that rate, you can see the price of things racks up very quickly. So 2 is what we can do time-wise and expense-wise, and it's also much like any fatality review team in your community. Members are serving on top of their day jobs. Nobody does this as their exclusive job, including me. So given that there can be an enormous amounts of reading to complete and also distances to cover, 2 reviews a year is about what we can manage. And the team decides which community they're going to next at the end of a given review. And so what we look at is what could we do in our next review that we haven't done before. So we started out doing homicide, suicides like many teams do. Then we decided to do a male perpetrated homicide. Then we did a female perpetrated homicide and some other variations on that theme, as you can see here. We do have one military base in Montana. It's an Air Force base. We did a review in which both of the members, both the victim and the perpetrator, lived on the base, and they're both referred to as airmen, even though one was a female. So they lived on the base, but they spent their weekends off the base in the community, and it was over one of those visits off the base in the community that the male strangled the female. So it was a state prosecuted crime, but with a great deal of input from the military criminal justice system. So we did a review there to see how did these two systems work together. We did a review in which the victim, a woman, worked in a convenience store, and her husband came to the store. She worked the graveyard shift and killed her in the workplace. So we did a review there to see how the workplace, how the people that owned the business handled this killing. And I might add that we uncovered a unique element in that, because the victim in this case killed himself and her, so their children were left as orphans, and actually the guardian ad litem for those children sued the workplace for having an unsafe work environment and ended up winning that suit. So a pot of money was arrived at for the children, both for counseling and their needs, but also for college or whatever that might be. So we ended up learning more from that workplace killing than we thought we would, which of course happens a lot. You think you know what the details or the particulars were in a review, and then once you dig into it, you find all kinds of things that you didn't know about. Montana's statute allows for a near-death review, and more teams, I think, are going here, where the victim, instead of dying, lives, and so is able, instead of the team having to look backwards and identifying these characteristics in hindsight just from criminal justice records, now can actually interview the person and have him or her participate in the team in a way that they would not be able to, obviously, if they're not willing to do that or not able to. So near-death reviews end up providing a cornucopia of information that death reviews do not. As everyone listening today knows, the vast majority of domestic violence incidents do not involve killings, and the vast majority of intimate partner homicides do not result in familicide, which is killing of the children as well. They do happen, however, and those reviews provide information that even a homicide-suicide do not. So our team took it upon itself to do, and you'll see in the listing of the deaths that we don't have many of those, but we did undertake a familicide or two in an effort to learn the details there. As I've already mentioned, we do fatality review in Indian country. We're the first team in the country that started doing those, and we now, as of in the last year, actually have the first Native American domestic violence fatality review team anywhere in the country. My colleague Joan Ely coordinates that work, and we'll have some more information on that towards the end of the review. But that started out with us trying to meet the needs of our underserved population, and now has blossomed into a full-blown fatality review team of its own. As I mentioned, we've done a couple of female perpetrator reviews, and those, it goes without saying, the details are different than a male perpetrator review, not only the weapon used, but what led up to it. In addition, we've done reviews that compare urban versus rural deaths, because even in Montana, which our largest city being Billings, having 100,000 people, in many states would be considered rural, we still have urban centers, and then much of the state, most of the state, is considerably more rural than that. So we end up seeing the importance of response times, both by law enforcement, where there might be only 2 deputies patrolling an entire county, and also with EMS. We've had, and in fact it was a female perpetrated death where a gentleman was stabbed, and it took a while for the principals involved to understand he was injured as badly as he was. And by the time EMS got to that very remote location, he had bled to death on the kitchen floor. Whereas if that killing had taken place in Missoula or Helena or Billings or a larger community, he would still be alive because he would have gotten the care that he needed. So it's important to look at deaths across, even if you're just doing this on a county level, you'll have areas of the county that are more urban, more rural, more affluent, less affluent, have a greater concentration of minorities, and the team, however big or small your team is, must reflect your community. As I mentioned, also our work in Indian country required us to learn a great deal as a team, because the statute that provided so much to our team meant nothing in a federal environment. The prosecutor was the U.S. Attorney, law enforcement was the Bureau of Indian Affairs or the FBI. We had to learn a whole new way of doing fatality review in a federal environment, and we've worked long and hard at that and had some success. We now have partners in all of those organizations and the U.S. Attorney's Office. But again, as the team grows and branches out and increases its scope, you will learn the need to add to your team. Montana's team, when we were trained by NDVFRI, had 5 members. It took us almost 10 years to get to the 18 members we have now, because little by little we learned that we needed a federal representative or a Native American representative or a faith community representative. So we took time to build the team to fill the slots that we had, because with only 18 we needed to be very intentional and very surgical in how we did that. The reviews take the better part of 2 days each, and my next slide will break down how those days are done, and that includes travel time. But as you can see, it's a major commitment to serve on Montana's team. But that said, we've had very little turnover. Generally, people that that come on the team want to stay there. Again, I've mentioned we travel to the community, and then we constitute or pull together what we call a local team. So these are all of the people that helped us gather information leading up to the review. So it's local law enforcement, local medical care, and local FICMER people, and Child Protective Services. Those people know that community way better than those of us in Helena or outside that community do, and they come in, they sign the fatality review team, and they're full-blown members of the team for the 2 days that we're in their town. And that way of doing business has added immeasurably to what we learn in our reviews. And then finally, another unique element that I've made reference to is that we interview family members, and I'll break down each of these elements over the next few slides. So this, if you can't, I hope it's clear enough to read if you lean in close to your screen, but I do want to point out that item number 1, the upper bullet there, that we, that those, I'm having trouble reading this myself, that are, we tend to look at homicides that are more recent, that have unique circumstances, and that are located in communities that we have not previously visited. That's some of our criteria. If you look then through bullet number 4, we talk about family members being interviewed, and sometimes those family member interviews are written up and disseminated to the team, but sometimes just a verbal report is given at the actual review. Bullet number 5 talks about that the coordinator of the commission, again that's me, disseminating information to the team. So all the information, whether it's a police report, autopsy photos, whatever that, crime scene photos, whatever that might be, comes to me and I disseminate to the rest of the team. But at their request, it does not come all at once. I break that information up so that it, they get 2 or 3 mailings a week, so that it doesn't come all at once. It's a burden, but that way not as crushing of a burden. Number 6 talks about the construction of the timeline. We did this as a group. Some fatality review teams do this where the coordinator perhaps puts the timeline together and then brings it as sort of a fait accompli to the team. But we do that as a group. We find out that many more details come out if we do that, each focusing on our expertise. And the idea here is that each team member is an ambassador. So law enforcement does better when they're talked to by another law enforcement officer. Judges hear better from judges. Advocates hear better from advocates. So those 18 members of the team then serve as ambassadors to their colleagues, both to pass on information of what the team learns, but also to collect information. So it's not a matter of me needing to knock on doors and constantly be asking for the information. We have the person who they know best that thinks that they should participate and they should give that information. Item number 7, one of the things it mentions there is that we have a meal together, and I think that's an essential part of how we do business. Between the morning of Friday, day 2, with the local team is there, and the afternoon of day 2, and we put our recommendations together, which is summarized on bullet 9 there. we have lunch together as a group, and the one rule of that lunch is that we don't talk about the review. We talk about how your kids are doing, you know, how do you like your new job, those kinds of things. So an element of trust and camaraderie is built up in that lunch that I don't think it has to be over a meal, but that's worked very well for us. That also helps deal with the difficulty or the trauma of doing this work. If you sat in on a fatality review, you know it's difficult emotionally, and getting to know your teammates outside of their role in the team can help to cushion that or make that less stressful. So again, that's worth looking through in more detail than I'm going to give it. I do want to mention there at the bottom of the slide that in Montana we are able to disseminate this information electronically. In the old days I used to make innumerable Xerox copies and send those out. Now with the push of a button, we do have a disclaimer which the attorneys on the team have helped me to craft to protect us from that information going public. But certainly if you're able to do that, electronic distribution is much simpler. And again, as I mentioned, that the timeline is constructed by the entire team. Each team member has all of that information. So everyone on the team has the information ahead of time. They come prepared. They have it highlighted. They have their questions prepared ahead of time. So even though we spend from 1 in the afternoon until 6 in the evening on day one building that team, sometimes 5 hours is just barely enough time, because even though we all have the same information, an officer sees things that a judge doesn't see, an advocate sees things that a sexual assault nurse examiner doesn't see, and that's the multidisciplinary collaborative approach of that, where the end result is much greater than the sum, or the sum is greater than the individual parts. This is a little bit more detail about the interviewing family members. This goes to choosing team members, and I'm going to go over with you in a moment who sits on our team. But in order, if you're going to go down the road of interviewing family members, it's absolutely essential that you have people that are comfortable with doing that. You can't assign someone to interview the mother of a dead person or of a child whose mom has died if they're not comfortable doing that. So while I decide who will interview, those are all people that have already agreed and have the skills to be able to do those interviews. We get the information from law enforcement reports, and then once a person is interviewed, then they say, gosh, you know, you really should speak to this person, and so on and so on. So what starts out as a small group of people enlarges quickly. We use a phone contact to identify those people. Other teams have used letters. I prefer a phone because there's always a chance that the letter will be set aside inadvertently, and the person who wanted to participate will run out of, will miss their chance. But either way, it's out of left field, no doubt. And because of that, the family member controls the process. They decide whether they want to participate. If they say they want to participate and then change their mind, all of that is just done at they direct that. They can pull the plug anytime. We do talk to families of the victim and the perpetrator. This is something we learned going forward. Initially, we just talked to the victim side, but we learn a great deal by talking. If you watch the film, you'll see the mother of the perpetrator speak about what this process was like for her. Also, in that case, she lost her son, she lost her daughter, she lost her grandchildren. Who's to say that she's not a victim as well? At the same time, she was very willing to talk with the team, but her husband was not. So it's not as though all family members are equally willing. They get to decide individually to do that, whether they want to or not. And we only talk to those who want to talk to us. In person is preferable, but anywhere, particularly in Montana, it's just not going to happen that we can do that. So those things take place over the phone. It's absolutely essential that the interviewer have time. If you watch the film, you'll see that Connie, the interviewer, spent 3 hours with one of her interviewing subjects. The vast majority of those do not take that long, but it's not the kind of phone call that you can say, gosh, I've got a plane to catch, or my kid's got a baseball game. Could you just summarize this or give me the high points? It has to be, the person has to have all the time they need, and the phone number there is that if the person thinks of something after the fact, they have a way of getting to you to add to what they told you. Also, almost always when that introductory phone call is made, you're not going to talk to the person at that time. You're going to set a time to talk later. Maybe the only phone number you have is for a work number. They're not going to talk about this at work, so you set a time and place for a place that they're going to be comfortable, and they'll call and you'll do the interview at a time that works for them. Our experience is that most have agreed to speak. Interestingly, we have the worst luck when we try to speak to the perpetrator themselves. So if we're doing an intimate partner homicide in which the killer is still alive, we'll attempt to interview that person in prison, and we only bat about 50% at that. Whereas almost every family member that we've wanted to has talked to us, and that's included children as young as 12. Of course, you're dealing with someone who's there to decide whether the child is up to that or not. But we're interested in speaking with everyone that will speak to us, and we have people on our team, CPS workers, DV advocates, therapists that are trained to do that kind of interview. The family needs to understand ahead of time that they're not going to be invited to the review, so it's a disproportionate request. We're asking for lots of information, and they're not going to get a lot back. All they're going to get back is what's in the fatality review report, and so we make that clear at the outset. And then I write a thank you note, which Attorney General Fox sends out. We understand it's an enormous undertaking for these family members to revisit these memories, and the least we can do is express our gratitude to them for doing so. This is a member of, this is who's on our team, and of course the names there won't mean anything to you, but I wanted to give you a sense of what their positions are, and that they're from various places around the state. If you know Montana, you'll see it's diverse. Our legislator, because we have an election coming up in November, is vacant, but 17 of those 18 are filled. One of the things that we've had at times is a victim on our team, and that's a struggle for every fatality review team. Are we going to have a victim? For a while we had a person who wore two hats. Our victim advocate was also a victim, and she could choose whether to identify herself as a victim or not. We then added an ad hoc person as a victim. It was many years since her victimization. She served for a while and realized that her memories were much more raw than she realized, and she ended up leaving the team. So I absolutely believe in the benefit of having a team, a person on a victim on the team, but that is much more difficult it's easier said than done. Also, when you're sitting around as team members and everyone introduces themselves as a law enforcement officer, as a victim advocate, as a sane nurse, for this person to say, I'm a victim of domestic violence, that's a whole level of vulnerability that the rest of us are not putting out there. And also, frequently it can be a young mom, and how do we help her with child care? This is not any kind of an environment for a child to be there. So there are logistical concerns that need to be addressed as well, but it can be done, and it's a laudable goal for a team to work for. You'll see on here the usual suspects. We have a member of the Montana Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence. We just have one coalition with both of them here. We have a member of Legal Services. We have law enforcement. We actually have 3 law enforcement members, because we have a local law enforcement, a state law enforcement, and then an FBI person, as you can see there as well. So it certainly is important we believe important to have law enforcement on the team. 3 of the 18 slots are taken by various members of the law enforcement community. This is a snapshot. If you were to look at our biennial report, you would see a listing of every intimate partner homicide from the year 2000 forward. Unfortunately, that is too many deaths to fit on a slide. So this is only the most recent deaths, and you can see here that it's current as of the 28th of May of 2014. This slide and the one after it look very similar, but each intimate partner homicide in Montana is tracked by the team. This isn't anything we knew we were going to do, but it became clear once we started doing our work that nobody else did it. So it has the person's name, the victim's name, the community in which they lived in, their age, the date of the death, and whether it was a homicide, a suicide, or as you can see further up there, there was a child involved, or a girlfriend involved, or a death by an officer. This humanizes intimate partner homicide in Montana with the name and also gives the details. Every time I give a presentation, I mention to people that if there's a name in a given community that isn't on here, we want to know about that, because this is the absolute official list of intimate partner homicides across the state. We do not track other kinds of family violence deaths, a mother who kills her child, a brother that kills a sister, an older adult, a 50-year-old son who kills his 80-year-old father, those kinds of things. These are just intimate partner homicides, which means that these deaths meet the same threshold that an order of protection does. This slide looks very similar, except you'll see on the right-hand side the cause of death, and you don't have to be a social scientist to see what the most common rate of killing is. It's a firearm. As you can see on most of these, where a knife is in that line, you go across to the victim's name. Almost always it's a male's name, but you can see about halfway down the page, there was a knife used by a man to kill a woman, but that's atypical. You also see close to the bottom, the weapon, quote unquote, was pushed off of a cliff. This is a case you may have heard about. It was on the news, in which a woman pushed her very recent 8-day-old marriage, 8-day-old husband off of a cliff in Glacier Park, and that's something that we've only seen, needless to say, on that one occasion. This is the very same information, but done in a pie. Some people can look at a list of deaths and see the information they want. Some are more visual people. So here's a list of those very same deaths. You can see at the top of the slide, it's 125 deaths since 2000. Smaller print at the bottom, you'll see that it's 82 events. And the reason that there are more deaths than events is because of those multiple deaths, homicides, suicides, and familicides. As you can see in Montana, homicides, suicides, and homicides are roughly equal. That's a bit higher than usual. Most communities will have way more homicides than homicides, suicides. One of the idiosyncrasies here is it's about 50-50. Here you can see by far the majority are gender, are male, but what you can't tell in this kind of a slide is that the number of female perpetrated homicides is going up. So each of these slides has benefits, but also things that just aren't reflected very well. Here's the weapon used, again, roughly 80%, and this rate is higher than many other communities. Almost always when I look at intimate partner homicides, at least 50% of the deaths are with firearms, but in Montana it's a full 80%. Again, you can see that knives are the second most common here in Montana. What this slide doesn't tell you is that almost all of those 12% are female perpetrated deaths rather than male perpetrated. Here's the next slide. That is the age of the victims, and this would look different in your community. In Montana, it's almost a perfect bell curve, but if we were charting deaths in some parts of Florida, for instance, the number of deaths of 60 plus would be much higher. Other places, the number of younger women's deaths, that 20 to 29 or 18 to 29 would be much larger. So that's why, again, this is a prototype. This is sort of a food for thought. But then when you implement these same kind of statistics in your community, they will look different. Montana doing statistical reporting like a Miami-Dade County could do, where you could really learn a lot through looking at numbers. That doesn't work for us. Our numbers of killing are too small. So we're doing anecdotal information. We're presenting the information that we have, but we will never have a sample size large enough to do any kind of crunching or statistical analysis. One of the trends reflected on this slide is that 60 plus, even though there are only 8 deaths listed there, 4 years ago there were 0 deaths at 60 plus. So Montana is an aging state, and that is being reflected in our rates of intimate partner homicide. This is simply a listing of the deaths. As you can see, there are good years and years that aren't good. If you happen to listen to Neil Websdale's webinar on fatality review last week through the Family Justice Center, you heard him say that it is never wise for fatality review teams to say that we are responsible for reducing domestic violence. You know, it would be easy perhaps in 2011 to say, gosh, through the work of the team, we dropped from 14 to 4, but if you're going to go that route, then you also have to be out front and center when it jumps back up to 10 and talk about how you're also responsible for that. So it certainly is a goal to reduce intimate partner homicides, but it is not the expectations that fatality review teams will eliminate that, unfortunately. Here's the very same information again, but in a different format. So this is an outline of the state of Montana. These are the fatalities. The larger the circle, the number of deaths in that community. As you can see, the vast number of these deaths are in western Montana, so west of Billings, and that's because the vast majority of people live in Montana west of Billings. Interestingly, though, if you can see that those areas that are shaded light blue, those are Indian reservations. And so you can see in the southwest corner and the northeast corner and the northwest corner that there are many small circles. So these are individual killings in Kirby and Busby and Lame Deer and Wolf Point and Brockton. And this reflects the elevated rate of killing around those reservations. But as you can see, they're not big circles there. These are not familicides. So here you can see, if you know what to look for, the information that's included in that other spreadsheet, but here is made clear through dots. And here again a similar picture, but these are the number of events rather than the number of killings. And if you know Montana, there's a dot up in the upper left-hand corner, Libby, which stands out as being a rate of homicide. Libby is a community of 2,600 people, and yet it has rates of killing of Great Falls with 50,000 people, or Billings 100,000 people. So while the team has not been to Libby yet, I can guarantee you we will be there, because there's something going on in Libby that's resulting in an elevated intimate partner homicide level that is just not clear to us. So the team will need to go to that community to understand what's going on, and that may not be clear in another kind of document, but this map makes it very clear. So one of the things that I mentioned about at the beginning is identifying trends. So these are the trends that Montana's team identified in our latest report. And as I've mentioned, it's essential that teams make clear what their trends are. So we actually have seen, while we've seen a decline in Native American deaths in the last 2 years, we still see that the number is higher than it should be proportionally. We see that firearms continue to be the highest. We see that the fourth quarter of the year is the most dangerous. Now, it's not clear why that is, but we'll be having a year with a minimal number of killings, and in October, November, and December, it just goes off the charts. As you can see here, most of the deaths are taking place in western Montana. We don't have time for an explanation of Dr. Websdale's humiliated fury, but if you listen to his webinar a week ago, or if you've read any of his work, he's identified as a core of intimate partner homicide, and we see that reflected here in Montana. We see that family members know way more about what's going on than law enforcement officers or DV advocates or clergy members, and so we see reaching out to family members being an essential part of doing intimate partner homicide. We continue to see a high, elevated level of suicide. Neil spoke at length last week about this, that for kids who survive deaths, unfortunately, in a heartbreaking manner, they almost never get the services that they need for a variety of reasons. And there are a number of teams looking at trying to overcome that trend, and we're more than happy to learn from others and how to get those services to kids that need them. And then, just not any news for anyone here, alcohol can be a big factor in these killings. We have a number of recommendations. We believe that recommendations need to be a manageable number, so we will never put out a report with 25 recommendations. I think there are 10 or 12 here. I'm not going to go through them at great length, but I do want to highlight them. And again, we believe that it's essential that teams have recommendations and that they be accomplishable, that they be doable, and that they be held accountable to do that. So the first one references hope cards, which I will get to in a moment. The second one talks about safety plans, not for adults, but for kids. We did a review in which the mom and the daughter had worked out a safety plan. The mother was killed before the daughter had a chance to implement that plan. but she did exactly as she'd been trained. She took the phone into the bathroom, locked the door, and dialed 911. If the safety plan had only been set up for the mom to educate the daughter in the heat of the moment, that never would have happened. So we believe that safety plans are essential not only for adults but for children as well. The next one talks about training collaboratively with the U.S. attorneys and our tribal members. We've gotten assistance from the Bureau of Indian Affairs to do that. We want to raise the level of crime victim compensation. As it is now, for $3,500, the only means of a funeral is cremation. Some families are not open to cremation, so we end up re-victimizing them by having cremation as the only affordable alternative. The second to the last bullet there talks about the Native American Fatality Review Team, and as I mentioned, we have accomplished that recommendation. The team has already done one review, and we'll do a second review just next week. So that has been accomplished. We have a program here at DOJ for limited English proficiency in a language line that hasn't gotten very much use. So we're using the report of the Fatality Review Team can highlight best practices not only around the state but also around the country. So we're putting this there so that anyone who reads the report knows that this service is available. We see more and more the importance of the ACE study, and again, I don't have time to talk about the ACE study now, but childhood trauma and how that informs adult trauma. So we're putting it's essential that recommendations then have instruments behind them. So we not only reference the ACE study here, but in the back of our report is the 10-question ACE study. So if we talk about clergy or medical professionals screening for domestic violence, we'll have in our report an instrument to make that possible. We talk about connecting kids with either a CASA member or a guardian ad litem following an intimate partner homicide. We highlight a bystander campaign that we think is worth paying attention to. And then one of our law enforcement officers, this is his soapbox. He talks about how every officer in Montana will be trained in DV at the academy, but once they leave, they're not required to have DV training after they're out of the academy. The final one is, I don't have enough time to go into great depth here, but what this does is allows us to track intimate partner perpetrators of domestic violence who also have an alcohol problem by folding them into this 24/7 program. We can monitor them in the same way that DUI drivers are monitored, which we hope will minimize the chances that they offend again. This is a picture of the Hope Card, and the last few minutes that I have before we get to questions, we'll talk about this. This is coordinated by my colleague Joan Eliel, and her information will be at the end. What this does is a very small plastic card, much like a credit card or a card to get into a hotel room. One side of it has all the information of the perpetrator. As you can see, their identifying characteristics and also the statute. If this was a tribal Hope Card, all 7 tribal courts in Montana have their own Hope Cards, or soon will. This would be the tribal statute. It's a laminated card. It has a hologram on it for safety. If you flip the card over, here you have information on the victim. And if there are protected people like children, they're listed here as well. So where the court was issued, when it expires. These cards are not available for temporary. Anything beyond a temporary order, though, a person can get a Hope Card. They request it. They can have as many of these cards as they want. So one can be at the daycare, one can be at the child's school. They don't have any special powers that a paper order does. They're just considerably more portable and more indestructible. If you have a person who's been granted a 3-year order of protection and is expected to carry that order with them, you can imagine what it will look like after being carried in a purse or a glove box for 3 years. Here, an officer, this is a law enforcement solution to a law enforcement problem. It's late at night. The victim, law enforcement has been called. The victim perhaps is bleeding. The children are crying. The officer is saying, the victim is saying he's not supposed to be here. The officer is saying, you know, I need a copy of your order. She can't find it, or the face page is damaged. This merely provides a timeout. The expectation is, as you can see there, law enforcement will verify this with local dispatch. It's a law enforcement solution to a law enforcement problem. The idea started out on the Crow Indian Reservation as the Purple Feather Campaign. The Fatality Review Team became aware of the Purple Feather Campaign and blew the Hope Card up statewide, so that Every jurisdiction in Montana is eligible for it, tribal and non-tribal. And because we use federal funds to create the Hope Card, your community is eligible to implement the Hope Card as well. We certainly don't have time to go into that today, but Joan's information will be at the end, and you'll have a chance to contact her. This for you internet-type people, here's a slide that shows how we pull the photo from the driver's license repository. We check the protection order, hot file, and what the Hope Card does is compresses all of this information onto a very small card, and you have now heard every element of my ability to explain the technology behind the Hope Card. Here are some benefits. If we had more time, I would go through this, but this just goes into more detail of what I said. It's a convenient, accessible card, has the recognition of law enforcement, it's free, the requester can have as many copies of the Hope Card as they want, and it does not have any special privileges that a paper order doesn't. It's just a lot more likely to be in the right place at the right time. My last slide here before getting to your questions is to just summarize what the team has been able to accomplish. Last week, Neil got a question about, so what have fatality review teams done? In Montana, again, we now are the de facto tracker of intimate partner homicide deaths. We put out this biennial report, so everyone in Montana conceivably has more understanding of intimate partner homicide than they did before we started doing our work. We passed statutorily an automatic 72-hour no contact order. So what this does in any community in which the judge has signed a standing order, at the moment a person is arrested for what we call partner family member assault, or PFMA, that person cannot reach out to the victim for 72 hours, so they can't spend their night in jail or their weekend in jail calling the victim to threaten or sweet talk her into dropping the charges. If he does, by the time he goes to see the judge, he'll have multiple misdemeanor violations of that no contact order to go along with his misdemeanor PFMA charge. We worked with the coalition to set up a pot of money through an increase in the marriage license fee in Montana, so that communities around the state have access to hire a compliance officer to ensure that the perpetrator of PFMA is actually getting his counseling or his chemical dependency evaluation and not skating around his obligations. Again, we enlarged this 24/7 program, which was a program created to deal with drunk drivers, to include batterers that have an alcohol problem. We did a training in Indian country that was at the request of the tribe. It was way too much difficulty for them to send members of their law enforcement agency a great distance to Helena. They didn't have enough people to spare them, so they asked the fatality review team to put together a training and bring it to the reservation. We did that at the direction of Attorney General Bullock. We rolled out the Hope Card in 2010. We started doing Indian country reviews in 2008 and instituted our team in 2014. We were one of those 3 VAWA-funded programs to serve as an example in the film. And we've served as a mentor for a variety of teams. Either I've gone to states through NDVFRI providing technical assistance, or we've had members of other teams come and sit in on reviews. One of the key elements of our team is that we're open to having visitors sit in on the team. It's not like a child death review team. We're willing to have outsiders come in and learn from us by participating. So between those 2 things, we've been passed on the same kind of information as we have today in a variety of communities. So you probably noticed that I went through slides quicker and started talking faster as the time went on, but I want to spend these next few minutes answering the questions that I have time for, and then I have one more slide with our contact information. So one of the questions I have here is, in our Native American reviews, are the majority of perpetrators male? And actually, that is not the case. In the reviews that we've done, and actually in the killings that we've done, in Indian country, in Montana, the majority of perpetrators have been female. So again, if we weren't committed to doing fatality review across the board in every nook and cranny of our state, we would have missed that. So it may well be different in your community, but here we see that they're female and they use knives, not firearms. A second question is how many cases are included in one review, and we just do one case per review. So in that 2-day period, and I had another question about what do I mean by an inch deep and a mile wide. If I said that, I misspoke. What I meant to say was, one way of doing reviews is an inch deep and a mile wide, so that you're getting a whole bunch of information and doing it in a less intentional way than we do. We refer to ours, this is a mistake if I said it differently, an inch wide and a mile deep. So we do just one review, one case per review. So when we did that military killing, or when we did the workplace killing, or when we did our near-death response, we spend all of those hours just looking at that one case. And of course, those are just the hours that are spent in the location. We spend hours and hours reading the material, gathering material, disseminating the material, and then interviewing family members. So all of the elements of fatality review that I've mentioned are all brought forward to just do one case per review when we spend those 2 days. And that's why we work so hard at making a case that we're learning new things about, because we don't want to just keep learning the same things over and over again. We don't want to learn about what a male perpetrated killing in Billings looks like, because not every killing in Montana is a male perpetrated killing in Billings. So we spend lots of time and lots of thought, where are we going, and what are we going to learn in doing so. A question that I hear all the time is how difficult is it to convince locals to participate in reviews? And it's less difficult than perhaps you might think, but that's why we use those ambassadors on the community. So if we have a police chief, or we have a child protective services worker, or we have a DV advocate that's skeptical, and that's one of the hazards of operating out of the Attorney General's office. Sometimes they see that we're coming, we're swooping in to identify the one person who did the one thing wrong that resulted in these deaths. And all of us listening today know that's not true. These deaths take place after a whole variety of dropped balls and missed opportunities and things that we wish would have been done differently. So having someone on the team, an officer that can talk to an officer, a judge to another judge, that helps overcome a lot of those things. There still is resistance, but I got to tell you that when those local members come into the room and they see the timeline, because we actually put the timeline on the wall. We used to use butcher paper, and then that paper got, the font would be two points high, and there would be arrows of all colors going all directions. We now put each fact or each item on an 8.5 by 11 sheet and stick it to the wall. So if we have a name wrong or a date wrong, we just simply remove the sheet and move it to the right place. When those local members come in and see that we've filled an entire conference room wall with the data that we gather, they know what they know about this case as an officer or as a DV advocate or as a judge. And when they come in and they see the totality of what we've been able to uncover, they see that we're not just dilettantes who are coming in here and doing this as a hobby. We've invested blood, sweat, and tears in getting that information, and they, in signing that confidentiality form, know that what they are going to say in the room stays in the room. And as we all know, everybody involved in a partner homicide knows more about the case than they're willing to write down. The DV advocate does, the officer does, and these people have lived in the same community in which the killing took place sometimes their whole lives. So we learn from a pastor who not only did the funerals for this intimate partner homicide, but also did the funeral for the brother who was so overcome with grief at his sister dying, committed suicide, or the daughter of an intimate partner homicide victim who, on the day she was graduating from high school, was involved in a one-car accident and ended up dying. This pastor did all of those deaths in this very small town and could talk to us about the enormous impact that this intimate partner homicide had, not only on the family but on the community. And that certainly is something we've learned over the years, is the repercussions of these killings. Who is a victim is much, much, much larger than the family. It's the officer who shot the perpetrator and never came back to serving as an officer anymore. It's the school counselor who took the child under her wing, and when that child was killed in a familicide, was so traumatized. She left her position in the school. The brother, as I mentioned, who began drinking excessively and ended up taking his life due to his frustrations in the judicial system, not treating the perpetrator the way he thought. All of these things we've learned not from paper and pen reports, but from inviting those local individuals into the room. And other than family members and other than media, and the family member's voice, again, is carried through, brought into the room by the interviewer, we have found the vast majority of people are willing to participate rather than turning us down, although that certainly happens. How long after a homicide do you start collecting data? This is a question that speaks to elements of the statute that I did not mention, is that we are limited to cold cases. So we can only review a case in which the perpetrator, there's no ongoing any kind of litigation. So for instance, that workplace killing that we talked about, we wanted to review that case right away, but once the guardian ad litem undertook that suit against the business, then we had to set aside that review actually for a number of years as it worked its way through the system. So we can only do reviews once they're closed, but we want to jump on them as soon as we can. So we don't do very many reviews that are 5, 6, 7 years old, because some of those people will have left their jobs, they will have retired, they will have moved away. So we do a review as soon as we can after the case is closed, and that again is required by statute. We do interview family members in all reviews, or we attempt it. Again, there are some reviews that family members won't talk to us, and then we just move on. But as you can tell, it's a much richer environment if they will. And again, in some families, one spouse will, others won't. Maybe an adult child will, but the parent won't. And again, that is driven and completely choreographed by the victim. We do not have a set of questions. We want the person doing the interview to be listening, not to be checking boxes. We also, as you can imagine, if you say to a family member, tell me about your daughter, or what was it like to lose your wife, or pardon me, your mother, there's not a lot of priming of the pump that's required. That information comes pretty easily. And again, it's written up by the interviewer and then either sent around through me to everyone else, or just passed on in person during the review. I have a question about implementing recommendations, and it falls to the team to make sure those recommendations are implemented. And sometimes recommendations are put forward knowing that we're not going to get them down in 2 years. For years and years, we had recommendations about implementing a dating violence curriculum. And every 2 years, we would hope that it would change. And finally, a particular shelter program in Red Lodge, Montana, came up with a dating violence curriculum that wasn't for big cities, it was for Montana. And so then we highlighted that in our review that year, and that recommendation went away. So it's not as though the only recommendations that we'll consider have to be achievable in 2 years, but we're going to report back to you through our report every 2 years. Obviously, if it's a legislative change, that's going to fall disproportionately to a legislator, but then it's my job to get them the information they need as it works through the legislature. And also, many recommendations don't require anywhere near a legislative act. We had an advocate who said to the judge, you know, when you have your initial appearance with the perpetrator at 8:30 in the morning, that perpetrator is back home by 10 in the morning before I can speak to the victim. And the judge said, okay, I'll just move that that initial appearance till after lunch, and that will free up the whole morning for you to be able to reach out to the person. So I want to be clear that some of the highlights that I've talked about are big, expensive, or sometimes take funding, but many of them don't. And someone in your community will say, gosh, we could do that differently. And those recommendations are every bit as valid and every bit as helpful and every bit as a protective factor against intimate partner homicide is something that the legislature done. I'm sure it's true where you are. It's certainly true in Montana. Local communities don't like things being forced on them by the legislature or the governor or the attorney general. If we can come up with a solution that starts at the grassroots level and members of the community buy into it because it came from them, that's all the better. So we're all about having recommendations that start down there, not necessarily that come just from the state. Question about whether coordinating, my position could be a full-time job, and would it make a greater impact? Perhaps so. Funding then would be a problem, whereas by me dipping into a variety of funding streams for my position here at the Office of Consumer Protection and Victim Services, I can do a patchwork to make that possible, and then through my work with NDVFRI, I get a chance to do this around the country. So it's a big part of what I do. And I don't know, and I would certainly think that in a larger community, if we were in Chicago or we were in Orlando or Los Angeles, that having a full-time person really could do that. It's an interesting question about whether that would work in Montana, and I don't know, but I don't see it happening in the near future. And then the last question I have here, so I would have a couple of minutes if you have another question, but there's one about collecting information on the perpetrator as well. And yes, we do that to the best of our ability. We have way more luck speaking to victims and family members of victims and coworkers of the victims, but we do work. This has been part of our maturing as a team to reach out to the perpetrator as well. As I said, we make every effort to speak to the perpetrator, and 2 or 3 times we've been able to do that, which means we're going into the prison and talking to the person there on at least one occasion while the person was shackled at their ankles and wrists, which makes for an interesting interview environment. But we'll also speak to the parents, we'll speak to the coworkers. Yeah, we'll run down whatever information that we can. But as I mentioned, we've been less successful on the perpetrator side than we have on the victim side. And if you're going to work with the perpetrator, then that requires working hard at having contacts within the prison or the jail or the pre-release center, whatever that is. I have made a connection with the public information officer at the men's prison here in order to speed up that process, because even though we have 6 months between reviews, it takes a long time to pull all of this information together, and particularly when we're doing a review in Indian country and we have to engage our federal partners, that takes a full 6 months. So even though it seems like we have a lot of time, we have to make that decision 6 months out. And also, not all fatality review teams have judges. We've got a couple of judges on ours, and as you know, they need to clear their schedules 6 months ahead of time. Is not too early to get particularly a district judge, but even what we call a lower court or a municipal judge or a justice of the peace to ensure that they're available as well, because it's not enough to have them just as an ally to gather information. For instance, the ability to get a pre-sentence investigation almost always requires a judge's signature, but it's essential that they be in the room to help educate the rest of us about what, maybe a judge wanted to take an action in this particular circumstance and wasn't able to, and the judge can help us to understand that. An officer can help us to understand the compromising factors that kept the sheriff or the local police officer from being able to take the action that they wanted to, let alone what an advocate, it's an environment, a fatality review environment is where those tough questions can be asked. You don't have to be nice, you don't have to pull punches, because people know each other, they trust each other, they like each other, and those hard questions get asked knowing that it's never going to get outside of this room. The only record, I failed to mention this, all of that paperwork has been shredded. There is no paper trail of a review in Montana ever having taken place, except for the summary document that our facilitator writes up, which includes the list of those recommendations and those trends. So even though people will come in with notebooks that are 3 inches thick with the information perhaps that they've printed off because they don't want to read it digitally, I carry all of that back to Helena and it's shredded. So there's no chance that a file is going to be left somewhere sitting on someone's desk with someone's medical information or crime scene photos, that kind of thing. So that helps to ensure confidentiality as well. Is all the public, all anyone outside of the team knows about that review is what appears in the report. And then I'll have, rather than trying to fit in one more question, this last one is, if we only do 2 reviews a year, aren't you constantly falling behind? And yes, we are. Even in a good year of 4 deaths, but in a year where there's 14 killings, we're only going to do a fraction of the intimate partner homicides around the country, or pardon me, around the state, which is why, again, we try to be so intentional of why are we going to do this one? Because we need to maximize the learning potential for both for the team and for the community in undertaking this review. It looks to me like I only have a couple of minutes left, so I want to put up this slide with my information, email, telephone. The good people at NDVFRI who are coordinating this webinar have access to me as well. Joan, as you can see there, is our Native American Fatality Review Team Specialist and our Hope Card Specialist. Only one wall separates Joan and me, so if you can get to either one of us, we can find the other. We'd love to talk with you about details of the Montana model if that's of interest. It was a quick overview, and again, if you want more information, you can contact me, or something even more in-depth, you can contact NDVFRI through their website or through Stephanie, and they can perhaps provide technical assistance if you would find that helpful. Stephanie?
Thank you so much, Matt, for presenting on the Montana model today. That was a really great presentation, and we had a lot of fabulous questions from folks. As we close, I would like to mention that everyone will receive a survey link for an evaluation. We hope that you'll take a few minutes to fill that out. We do take those seriously, and they allow us to improve our events. We are currently exploring the best way to house the webinar recordings, so you'll receive an email later on with instructions on how to access that when we determine how to house them. The next webinar in this series will likely take place in November. Our contact information is up on this slide. On our website, you can find much more information, including examples of reports from all over the country, confidentiality documents, as well as the video that Mr. Dale referenced in the beginning of his presentation that features the Montana team and sort of how their process works. You can also reach us via email at ndvfri@nau.edu. So thank you everyone so much for joining us, and we hope to have you all at our next webinar as well. Have a great day.